Hi everyone and welcome back to the George Collection. I am Rachel with Right Side Blonde. Today we're continuing our CIA/FBI series and we're going to be talking about a person named Bill Gates. This is from the February 1997 issue of George. This is the infamous edition that talks about the certain lung attacking virus that's going to be plaguing the nation. I've already done one episode using this issue and that was Indictment Day, Will Hillary Get Busted? So make sure you go back and find that episode. Let's get into the Bill Gates article. John Kennedy talks to the head of Microsoft about money, Murdoch, and why he's a politician's favorite photo op. Bill Gates of Mouse and Men. In the United States, great wealth is often acquired with great speed, but no one has ever amassed so much so quickly as has Bill Gates, the 41-year-old co-founder, chairman, and chief executive officer of the Microsoft Corporation. With a personal fortune in excess of $20 billion, Gates presides over a company whose net worth in excess of $100 billion is more than 10 times the gross domestic product of Zaire. Not only that, his name has become synonymous with the information revolution. His achievement is all the more astonishing when you consider that the young Gates was sure enough about his vocation in 1975 to drop out of Harvard University in his sophomore year and team up with his high school friend Paul Allen to lay the foundations of the Microsoft Corporation. It's hard to believe that the calm, modest, boyish-looking Gates, the opposite of the stereotypical swashbuckling entrepreneur of old, has transformed not only the computer industry, but also how millions now work and communicate with each other. In the business community, however, there are those who say that Microsoft, the epitome of the modern company, has adopted the predatory business practices of old-fashioned industrial behemoths such as General Motors or IBM, that Microsoft's share of the software market is approaching a dangerous monopoly. In 1995, Microsoft had to drop its plans to take over software producer Intuit amid accusations that the acquisition would represent a breach of antitrust legislation. Indeed, during the course of my interview, the only occasion that disturbed the placid exterior of Microsoft's chairman was when I brought up this issue. With his software programs, a ubiquitous feature of offices and homes in the Western world, Gates is now hoping to alter the practice and the perception of the government. In Gates's view, so long as government is prepared to embrace the information revolution, then we can all expect government to become smaller, more accessible, and infinitely more accountable. Yet there are some who believe that Gates's vision of the future, a computer-driven democracy in which the individual, liberated by technology, will be self-sufficient, might easily lead to the scenarios predicted by Aldous Huxley in Brave New World or George Orwell in 1984. Far from connecting people to each other, Gates's critics allege the computer age will herald an era of social alienation, a world where everything can be acquired or communicated via one's workstation, and where there will be little need to participate in what we understand to be civic life. Worse still, it might allow government to pry more effectively into our lives. As I walked through the Microsoft campus of Redmond, Washington, just outside Seattle, the only city people move to so they can be closer to nature, as a writer once joked, I couldn't help noticing a utilitarian quality about the place. Here, Gates is known by all simply as Bill, and there's a collegiate feel to the buildings. As for the people who work for Bill Gates, they walk around looking relaxed and just fine. Some earnest Microsoft employees insist on wearing shorts year-round, regardless of the temperature outside. But there's also an air of overwhelming purposefulness. You are less likely to find a tie or suit hanging on the back of a door than a sleeping bag for cat naps during those long Northwestern nights, programming the next generation of Microsoft software. Just how far the appearance of the place matched the temperament of its maker, I would only learn after I had entered Building 8 and climbed to Floor 2, where the chairman of Microsoft has his surprisingly modest office. Like last week, this is a Q&A session, so I will read John Kennedy's question and then I will read Bill Gates' answer. John Kennedy asks, "There's a lot of speculation these days about how the internet will change our lives. I'm particularly interested in how you think it will change politics and people's interaction with government." Bill Gates replies, "There's an opportunity to improve politics and democracy whenever you have an advance in communications technology. The internet is a tool that lets you find information in a much better way than anything else. Historically, most tools of communication were either broadcast, which meant your material had to appeal to millions and millions of people, or personal and able to address only a very small audience. But the internet provides a single individual with access to virtually unlimited information on any given topic." John Kennedy asks, how can that improve the political process? Bill Gates replies, well, let's say they're cutting $5 billion from some program in the budget. Most people don't have enough background to know whether this is a wise move or not. They don't know the key political issues, what the trade-offs are, or how this particular budget item has been spent historically. With the internet, not only can you take that news item and have it linked to background information, but you can also reach out and find other people who are interested in that issue. The internet is scalable in the sense that if something really catches your eye, you can become as educated and involved on the subject as you want to be. John Kennedy asks, so one of the things that the internet has changed is the dynamic between elected officials and their constituents. Suddenly, the folks in Washington aren't the only ones with access to all the relevant information on a given issue. Bill Gates replies, clearly elected officials are more accountable now. For example, if there is a big vote in Congress, I can quickly find out exactly how my congressperson voted and even what he or she had to say. You cannot get that level of detailed information in a national news article. About 40% of US homes have personal computers now, and that's rising, so the implications of this kind of accountability are significant. Next statement, constituents also can now swamp their representatives with data as opposed to the other way around. Bill Gates replies, well, it must be pretty hard with the paper mail nowadays, because people try to bombard a congressperson's office with various opinions. Electronically, it's a lot easier. Congresspeople can now use email as a sort of poll to see how many people were for something and how many people were against it. Though I feel sorry for the person who reads the president's email, because I'm often copied on the same junk email. Next question. That sounds like Ross Perot's notion of direct democracy. Is that where we're headed? Bill Gates says, in the future, direct democracy will be feasible. An extreme example would be to say, on a weekly basis, we'll take an issue and have everybody vote on it. But personally, I think representative democracy is better. Elected representatives can be a lot more thoughtful. They have the time to listen to both sides of an issue and often come up with the non-obvious solution. In the future, we'll have to choose representative democracy, not because it's the only system available, but because we believe that it's the best approach available. Next question from John Kennedy. In your book, The Road Ahead, you describe people becoming more self-sufficient through technology. You say it will allow people to eliminate many of the tedious routines of everyday life. What are the implications for our government? How will the burgeoning electronic community change our national community? Is government being rendered obsolete? Bill says, I don't think there's much the government does that you can eliminate altogether. Certainly technology will make the government a lot more efficient. In the future, instead of filling out paper forms or standing in line and talking to somebody in a governmental department, people will simply go online. So the government can be smaller than it is right now, but it's not dramatic. I mean, it's not like you say, oh, this is the world of the internet, let's get rid of the VA hospitals. John Kennedy's next question. How do you respond to the argument that the cost of this technological self-sufficiency is the loss of our traditional sense of community? If you can get everything you need through your phone or TV, you lose those kinds of human exchanges that keep us connected as citizens. Bill says, it cuts both ways. Say I'm from Israel, and I want to listen to a radio broadcast from my homeland. Today you go on the internet and boom, you are there. No matter where you're located, you can maintain contact with any cultural group you belong to. On the other hand, physical communities were really primary when we were all just farming together and there were no telephones and no books. As you make the world a smaller place, ties to people in your proximity are paradoxically reduced. But those physical communities impose cultural standards in a stronger way than when you are free of those constraints and don't have that kind of attachment. Next question from John Kennedy. Will online communities ever replace physical communities altogether? Bill says, it's nonsense to think that people are just going to sit at home and use their computers. But people shouldn't underestimate how much we are going to improve the nature of that computer experience. There will be talking 3D images of yourself that will enable you to sit and converse with people, play games with people, and a lot of neat things. We will never replace the idea of let's go on a picnic together or let's climb a mountain together. In fact, as technology increases our efficiency, we will have extra time to engage in leisure activities with one another. Let's take shopping as an example. Sometimes shopping is purely utilitarian. I need to get soap, so I go on the internet, type in soap, and the soap gets delivered. But sometimes shopping is an experience with a bunch of people, when you want to window shop and all that. In no way does the computer mean you are not going to make that choice. Next question, do you think that people who are disposed to experiment with technology have a kind of distinct political orientation or identity? Bill Gates replies, well, there are a lot of people involved with technology who are very optimistic about what technology will provide. They tend to think there's got to be a way of structuring incentives so as to greatly reduce government involvement. So you will probably find a lot more libertarians in the technology sector than anyone else. Kennedy says, what about people on the internet? Gates replies, The internet has grown enough now that you can find people of all political stripes out there. I think the internet represents the future. That's why you had Bob Dole giving out his website address in a presidential debate. Every politician wants to be associated with the future. There's no country where I've gone where there hasn't been interest among the top political leaders in sitting down and talking with me. Part of it is the legitimate issue of talking about how their country can exploit technological advances, and part of it is just trying to associate themselves with technology and the bright future that comes with it. Yes, he said exploit. Kennedy's next question: what do you see as government's role in developing the internet? Bill Clinton has drawn analogies between the information superhighway and Dwight D. Eisenhower's highway building program in the 50s. Gates replies, the highway analogy would suggest that the government should be deeply involved. The government built the highways, but in the case of the internet, no one is suggesting that the government needs to do anything of the kind. Whenever you have something new like this, it's best for the government to sort of sit back and see how it develops. And where there are problems, fine, the government can step in. For example, some people said, let's have the government come in and set standards on the internet, so all these systems that are formatted differently will work together. Thank goodness the government didn't choose to do that, because the de facto standards that have evolved are working super well. So to date, the government's role in setting standards has been quite modest. Kennedy says, but aren't some new laws necessary to deal with this new world? Gates says, it's also surprising how well old concepts carry over into the new medium. It's overly idealistic to act like, oh, the internet is the one place where people should be able to do whatever they wish, present child, do scams, libel people, steal copyrighted material. Society's values have not changed fundamentally just because it's an internet page. Take copyright. Sure, there should be some clarifications about copyright, but the old principles work surprisingly well in the new medium. Anybody who says you have to start over, I don't agree with that. Kennedy says, will it be possible to maintain our privacy in a digital world? Gates replies, privacy is a very interesting issue. I think people are a little naive about how much data exists about them electronically today. Some countries are already issuing these smart cards with all your vital information on them. You use them to claim medical benefits, to vote, to identify yourself to the bank, and so on. Kennedy says, sounds Orwellian. Gates replies, you know, the degree of privacy afforded each individual will always be a political decision. It's a decision for each society. The U.S. is the ultimate we believe in privacy country, so the government will probably never issue smart cards. At the same time, attitudes can change. If, for example, the U.S. went through a terrible period of terrorism, people might decide to draw the line about privacy a little differently. Keep in mind this is from February of 1997. John Kennedy replies, speaking of the government, do you think that the antitrust investigations brought against Microsoft are fair? Gates replies, well, the industry we are in is very important. We've been immensely successful, so at some point it's going to be worthwhile for the government to look at our industry. We don't have any issues with the way the laws are written, or even with the idea that very successful companies like ours are going to be looked into. What's interesting is that in terms of power in the marketplace, none of us in the world of high technology have the kind of power that, say, Coke has in the soft drink market. In our business, not even the most successful companies like IBM or Microsoft can stand still. If we stand still, we are going to get replaced pretty quickly. Our business is less forgiving than any other that I can think of. We reached a consent decree with the Justice Department freely and fairly, and we are perfectly satisfied with what came out of that. But as long as we are successful, competitors will try to exploit the situation and try to hobble us as a competitor. This is a little note. After protracted negotiations, Microsoft signed a consent decree with the Department of Justice in July of 1994 to settle charges of antitrust violations. The company agreed to monitor itself, primarily to consider whether new acquisitions would lead Microsoft to further dominate the software market, and to cease acquisitions if it would. Next question from John Kennedy. What about the criticism that Microsoft's dominant position in the industry is anti-competitive, that the industry should be reconfigured so that 1,000 flowers can bloom instead of one big tree that dwarfs everything else? Bill Gates replies, anybody who would say that doesn't understand our business. There are more new companies created in our industry than in all the other industries put together. Kennedy asks, wouldn't the competition and variety be even greater in the PC industry without a dominant player like Microsoft? Bill Gates replies, no. Someone had to come in and play the role that we play, that is, create the standards and really evangelize the platform. Why are there 100 times more software companies today than before? It's because we are writing software for a standard environment that Microsoft created. Why are there so many hardware companies offering all these choices? Because there's a standard hardware environment that we created. Another question Kennedy asks, Ralph Waldo Emerson said that an institution is the lengthened shadow of one man. In what sense is Microsoft a reflection of you? Bill Gates replies, in the sense that we love great software. We're very optimistic about what software can do. We're very product-oriented, very much looking for the new things we can do. It's a bit of an engineering culture here, fairly fast-moving. A lot of companies waste a lot of time congratulating themselves about what's going well. When I sit down and talk about a product, I just focus on the opportunities to make it better. You can save a lot of time that way. Another question Kennedy asks, Microsoft just entered into a partnership with NBC for a news channel/website called MSNBC. You've also recently launched Slate, an online magazine. As you get deeper into the information business, will your own views color the content of the news you provide, the way Rupert Murdoch has set the Fox News channel up as an antidote to the perceived liberal bias of the establishment press? Gates replies, I'm not interested in doing that. I'm surprised Rupert is able to retain quality people with that approach. I mean, that's very dangerous and perhaps inappropriate. He claims he's just reacting, that the rest of the press has a liberal bias. I personally don't see that. The people you hire to be editors and writers, they have their own opinions. That's their job. My job is to run a great software company. I'm very careful to keep my political views separate. Kennedy asks, why do you keep them separate? Gates says, because the alternative is inappropriate. I have my personal views. Then there's Microsoft, a company that gets involved in very few political things. My own views are those you'd expect from anyone who feels like he's been very lucky and that the resources under his command are really society's resources. And I have to be clever about how I'm going to funnel those back in. I fund education projects. I fund population control. I'm very big on United Way. Kennedy says, do you mind whether I ask if you're a Democrat, a Republican, or an independent? And Gates replies, well, it's a tricky issue because, as I said, I try to keep my political views separate from the company's. I went to an event where I said I was a Democrat, and that was covered publicly. When it comes to issues of how business is treated and managed, I wouldn't subscribe to a lot of Democratic views. When it comes to social issues, you'd find me very much on the Democratic side. Gates speaks of his money, and Kennedy goes on to ask this question, so you're planning to give most of your money away when you die? Gates says, I'm giving away $30 to $40 million a year now, and since 1992 I've donated $200 million to my foundation. So I'm already doing some things, but as a percentage of my wealth, I'll do most of it when I can put full-time effort into that. That's the only caveat. My work now is focused on trying to keep Microsoft successful. Kennedy says, how does the immensity of your wealth affect your life? Gates replies, it's a very strange thing. I think it's unusual that someone can have so much money. Kennedy says, it strikes you as strange? Gates says, oh, very. Are you kidding? Somebody who has this much money has a command on society's resources. In my view, it all comes down to how you use it. Kennedy's last question was, what do you see on the road ahead for the Microsoft Corporation? Gates replies, we're based on a vision of computers becoming an incredible tool for everybody. It's a vision that's very far from being realized. Computers can't listen to what you're saying. They can't speak to you. They can't see. They don't learn. I mean, computers are still pretty limited today. My entire life has been devoted to the future, and exciting new things are on the way. There is something called Moore's Law, which says that basically every 2 years computers get twice as good. That's a sure thing. I don't know, reading through this article and knowing where we are today with the internet and who's listening and who's watching us, sure seems like it was part of the plan all along, but maybe that's just me. I hope you enjoyed this week's article. I hope you all keep doing your research and sharing what you find. Have a great week, and I will see you next time.
Magazine, George, which is a hoot of a magazine. I thought you were a lawyer.
I was.
What happened?
Well, we decided, actually taking a cue from folks like yourself and you around the 1992 election, that there was an opportunity here to change the definition of a political magazine. Certainly the way Americans were accessing information about politics and politicians was changing. Candidates were appearing on late-night talk shows, on talk radio, on sitcoms, and there was a kind of a leveling process, and while the rest of media clearly had caught up with that, we felt that political magazines per se hadn't.
Your mother was a hell of an editor at Doubleday.
That's what I hear.
Would she have liked George?
I think she would have.